Well, I'm very proud of my life, my work life. And I tried really hard wherever I worked.
Have an open mind, and it's amazing what truths you gain.
Take a pause and just relax, unwind, make life simple again.
Welcome to Elder Wisdom, Stories from the Green Bench. I'm Erin Davis, and along with my co-host Doug Robinson, who resides at the Village at Sandalwood Park in Brampton, we are super excited to spend time with our guest today, and you will soon hear why. Before we even met our esteemed guest, we had learned and witnessed the mantra of the people he surrounds himself with. Teamwork makes the dream work. And what a perfect way to continue our theme of connection, family, and service. What Schlegel Village's retirement and long-term care residences are all about. The Right Honourable David Johnston is a man who truly lives up to his honorific, as I think you'll hear. As Governor-General of Canada from 2010 to 2017, Mr. Johnston was memorable for all of the best reasons as Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II's representative in Canada. And guess what? He's long been associated with Schlegel Villages. And so we've made sure the Green Bench is extra shiny and ready for him to join us here today. Well, you know, Doug, what is so special among so many things about our guest today, the Right Honourable David Johnston, is he's like the former news presenters of CBC and BBC in that he has dressed for this. He has a tie on. So in honor of David Johnston, what we're going to do is I am in a ball gown and Doug, you're in your tuxedo. Isn't that correct?
Yep.
Good. All right.
We should have the video cameras on for that.
Oh, we will. We will. What a delight it is to have you with us. And we want to start off by offering you the utmost respect, calling you the Right Honourable David Johnston. And how would you like to be addressed, sir?
Well, call me David, Erin. And as I said, anytime you use the title, it's a $10 fine, and it doubles with each subsequent offense, and all the fines go to the Rideau Hall Foundation. So go ahead and commit those wrongs, and the monies will tally up.
Okay.
But otherwise, it's David.
I'm going to start out and still say, good afternoon, Your Honour.
That's $10, Doug, and counting.
And I'll pay the $10.
May it continue.
All right.
I'm David.
It's lovely, lovely to have you here. And you are such an important part of the Schlegel family, but we want to go back a little bit before we get to the present and, of course, to the future with the Rideau Hall Foundation, sir. 2010 to 2017, you were the most wonderful Governor-General of Canada. Do you ever have a moment, especially in this year of Her Majesty's Jubilee, that you go, oh, gee, it'd be nice to be wearing those medals again and to be in that position once more?
We loved the 7 years we were there, and it's really a two-person job. Sharon was so much a part of it, and it was just a joy to see the country through a different lens. And, of course, having the chance to come to know Queen Elizabeth was just remarkable. 70 years on the throne we celebrate this year, and she epitomizes the leader's servant. Has just been a remarkable part of what makes Canada such a special place. The longest-serving monarch in British constitutional history, and that's 1,000 years of constitutional history. You know, we're so blessed in this country with a rather unique form of government that's evolved over 1,000 years.
Mm-hmm. And, of course, you're speaking to a former British citizen here with Doug Robinson, who no doubt has some perspective to share on this.
I had the pleasure of serving her mother, the Queen Mother.
She was special.
Oh, she was special, really.
Yes.
I have a wonderful photograph with her.
Isn't that grand? I tell stories about the personal qualities of the royal family that we really don't know, but one is a story I tell of, was actually on Stuart McLean's Vinyl Cafe on one occasion. It was a couple living in Montreal. It would be in the 70s when things were getting a little difficult in Quebec, and sentiment for the monarchy was not at its height. Mm-hmm. And they lived in an apartment building on Sherbrooke Street, and they were working very hard to learn French. And the manager of the apartment building with his office in the front door was a man by the name of Monsieur Tremblay. Very nice man. He would chat with them each day and correct their French and so on. One day he invited them in for tea, and they came in, and lo and behold, there on his wall was a large picture of Queen Elizabeth. And they said, Monsieur Tremblay, c'est très remarquable, vous avez a photo de Sa Majesté. It's remarkable that the Queen is there. Mm-hmm. And he said, I love the Queen. And they said, well, that's wonderful to hear. We have enormous respect as well. Can you tell me why? He says, well, I was a sergeant in the Vendu, the 22nd Canadian Regiment during World War II, and we were stationed in the southwest of England, and we were on a training mission, and we came across a British military personnel truck on the side of the road with a hood up when we stopped, and lo and behold, it's actually a hospital truck, and there were two young women in uniform trying to see something under the hood. We stopped, and we said, can we help them? And they said, well, yes. And he said, I said, well, this is something we can fix quite easily. It's a fan belt, and we'll replace that for you. Why don't you ladies go and just have a cup of tea over here, and we'll put a blanket out for you, and we'll have this done in about 15 minutes. And this young lady, 21 or 22, said, no, sir, you are my superior. I will stand here so that I can assist if you need me. So he finished the job and told the ladies he was finished, and then he recognized something remarkable about this young woman of 22. And as they drove off, he realized it was Princess Elizabeth.
Goodness. Wow. Service long before she had to, but into which she was born.
Indeed.
And of course, you've known a life of service as well, David. And one of the stories that you tell in your book, The Idea of Canada. And I love this question because I think it just sort of sums up a great place to even continue with this chat today. Who are you anyway? Tell us the story behind that question and the answer that you give, would you please?
Well, that's quite a story. Who am I? Sharon and I made a lot of visits across the country, and particularly the north, which is just a place for which I have enormous admiration and interest. And we were in, it was Repulse Bay, which is just above the Arctic Circle, late in August. And when we arrived there early in the morning, we realized they were having a Terry Fox run that day. And Sharon and I, with our children, now our grandchildren, run in every Terry Fox run each year. So there was one, and we had our running gear with us, so we got dressed up in tracksuits, and there we were at the start. And as I was about to sound off the pistol, a little guy about eight, an Inuit lad, came up to me and says, who are you anyway? And I said, I'm the Governor General of Canada. What's your name anyway? I said, my name is David. Well, David, how old are you anyway? I said, I'm 64 years old. He says, 64? He says, I didn't think anybody could get that old. So Sharon and I did the race. We came back and finished it, and I found the little guy, and I put my arm around his shoulder, and I said, not dead yet anyway. So I say that as that's a who am I, because it permits you to kind of see yourself through the eyes of others. And one of the good things about that is you never have to worry about changing your hatband size. It keeps your head steady and keeps you focused on being conscious of something other than yourself.
That's wonderful. What a great way for each of us to look through that prism, as you say, and keep the hatband the same size. Well, let's tell everybody a little bit about who you are. Born in Sudbury, so of course you played hockey. Come on.
Yes.
You even played with the Esposito Brothers at one time, did you not?
In Northern Ontario, Erin, you learn to skate before you walk.
Right, right. It's true. Grew up in Sault Ste. Marie.
Yeah, I was born in Sudbury, Coppercliff, and then moved to Sault Ste. Marie when I was 6. And of course, the Sioux like Sudbury is a wonderful sporting town. I played on a team called Algoma Contractors, and it was largely Italian Canadians. There were 3 of us who formed one forward line, Frayne, Ryan, and Johnston. They called it the spaghetti line. But Phil and Tony Esposito were members of that 17 another team. We won a provincial championship. Oh. And Tony was 14 years old, and people say to me, come on. And Tony was the backup goaltender. They say, Tony Esposito, backup goaltender? I said, yeah, he was age 14 on a 17 another team. Wow. So they were great stars. And Lou Nanny played on that team as well, went on to Minnesota, and we had Chico and Wayne Mackey just before and after, and Gene Ubriaco, and some great players out of that wonderful community of Sault Ste. Marie.
Wow. Talking of hockey, David, Are you a Leaf supporter or a Senator supporter?
Uh-oh.
I want the truth.
I was in the Canadian Tire Centre one time with a friend who had season's tickets, and I went to see a game when I was GG, and as we got there, he pulled out a duffel bag, and he had 7 Ottawa Senators sweaters for all of his family members, and he was about to put one on me. I said, I can't do that. This is a national broadcast. I've got to love all the teams. So when I'm asked which is your favorite team for the Stanley Cup, I say any Canadian team that's in the finals. Well, what happens if it's Toronto and Montreal? I said, I'll be glad to cross that bridge when I come to it.
Amen. Amen. Well, there is one love that goes back even farther than our memories of when the Leafs last won the Stanley Cup, which was 1967. And you have been married now since 1964. You have referred to Sharon and your life partner on this wonderful ride together. So I know that Doug has lots of questions about marriage and happiness and all of that. So, Doug, I'm going to let you lead the way here.
Thank you, Erin. David, in 2 years' time, you're going to be 60 years married. Do you have anything special planned?
Well, first of all, I would say, yes, we were married in 1964, but for Sharon, it's much worse than that, Doug. I was her first date in high school when she was 13. Oh. So that poor woman has had to put up with me for even longer than the years since 1964. What we'll do on the 60th, I think, is we'll gather the 5 daughters and the 14 grandchildren, and we'll have a wonderful party that celebrates 3 generations, and that'll be our family all together and just having a grand time.
Yeah, I celebrated my 60th last year.
Wow, about that.
I've known my wife for 80 years.
My gosh.
We grew up in the same street during the war.
What street was that and where, Doug?
In Gilby Road in Tooting, South London.
Sure. Well, isn't that grand? Yeah. It's a wonderful story, isn't it? Well, I grew up about 5 blocks away from Sharon. She lived on Summit Avenue, which, of course, was above the hill. And I live on Woodward Avenue, which was below the hill and below the tracks. So that kind of separated our station in life. But somehow she managed to overcome that and was prepared to date me through high school and university. And we were married in 1964 and then spent our first year of marriage in Cambridge, England, which was absolutely wonderful.
When you were dating and courting, was there ever any chance that you might have become a professional hockey player? I mean, obviously the road not taken, but was that ever something that Sharon might have been, she might have been a hockey wife at one time?
Yeah, we certainly, a young lad growing up in Sault Ste. Marie, athletics are a big part of your life, and it was an aspiration. But my mother discouraged me from playing junior A hockey. We had a scout in our home when I was, I think, age 14. And when she learned that the boys generally didn't go to high school while playing and had no aspirations for university, that kind of put a stop to that. But I went to college in the United States then, and I was invited to the Boston Bruins tryout camp in 1963. 6 teams in the NHL at that point. And our coach at that time had been the coach of the Bruins, knew them well. And after a lot of consideration, I had a scholarship to go and study law in Cambridge and decided to do that because it was unlikely I would have made the Bruins in my first year, and I would have been at their farm club, which was the Providence Reds in Rhode Island, going to law school at night and trying to play hockey. And I'd contracted mononucleosis in the last part of my senior year, so I had been in hospital for 10 days at that point of time, and I guess I concluded that the fickle hand of fate had said, go and learn how to be a lawyer and not to be a professional hockey player.
And here you are, holding honorary doctorates from more than 25 universities and learning institutions, as well, of course, as your law degrees from Cambridge and Queen's University, invested as an officer of the Order of Canada and promoted to companion, the Order's highest level, in 1997. I think your mom would have been pretty proud of that decision that you made, as we all are.
It's very risky for that promotion, Erin. There are 65 living members of the order who occupy the companion status, and I joke with people who who become companions. And while I was Gigi, we would actually preside over the ceremony. I said, you got to realize now there's a bounty on your head because one of us has to disappear for someone to come into the ranks.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good to know. Well, you're safe here with us. You're safe here with us.
Thank heavens. I'll breathe easily.
Good. You talk about the family connections and what you're going to be doing for your 60th anniversary, and nothing could be more important than gathering your daughters and your grandchildren. So let's talk about the importance of family connections, something that you've sat on our green bench, which is so safe, so welcoming, to discuss with Ron Schlegel, of course, who is behind this whole idea of sharing the wisdom of seniors. Let's talk about family connections, especially in the 21st century. Could we please, David?
Well, I just can't emphasize enough the importance of family. For me, the two rocks in my life have been my family and my spiritual faith, my religion. I come home each evening from work. I was a general manager of universities for 27 years, 3 5-year terms at McGill and 2 6-year terms at Waterloo before we went to Ottawa. And I must say, if the day was a little difficult, you come home and join your family and say all is well. And this is marriage where it begins, but for us, having children was simply a profound experience. And now we live it again through the 14 grandchildren and see life through their eyes. I say all the important things in life I've learned from my children and now my grandchildren. And so the family is first of all, just a foundation of love, uncompromised, unconditional love. And it's a constant learning experience. Marriage is a constant learning experience. And so I celebrate the families. In fact, in my installation address as Governor General, entitled A Smart and Caring Nation, A Call to Service, families and children were the first of our 3 priorities. And Sharon in particular pursued that pillar of our mandate for 7 years, especially with respect to mental health, where she has a great interest. She has a doctorate in rehabilitation medicine from McGill, and for her, the importance of families with respect to mental health simply couldn't be reinforced enough. And one of bringing mental health out of the closet, out of the shadows, and putting it in the same light of day as physical health. And then secondly, the hope that we've learned so much about the human mind in the last 20 years that we can do remarkable things with mental illnesses that we couldn't even think of the years before. But that's all part of family. And of course, family is your refuge in times of trouble, in times of challenge, and something that we in Canada, I think, should celebrate and to reinforce. I think of George Vanier, one of our most beloved Governor General, who, when he left the office, established the Vanier Institute for the Family. That, for him and his wife, were such cardinal principles that are, again, plus their faith. They were devoted Christians, and in fact has a small chapel in Rideau Hall in the home of the Governor General, and they would be praying in that chapel each day as just part of their daily routine.
Talking of grandchildren, David, how come you became Grandpa Book and Mrs. Johnston Granny Shine?
Good for you, Doug. Well, Granny Sunshine, as she's called, is that because she's typically up about 6:30 in the morning, often before the sun rises. She takes our dog out, and she has a quick little breakfast, and then she sits down to write. She writes historical fiction novels. She's just in the middle of the third of a trilogy. And then around about 11:30, she goes to ride her horse, and she comes home about 1 o'clock and has lunch and says, "Let the day begin." So she's Granny Sunrise to the grandchildren. When they stay with us, they get up with her, and she doesn't do too much writing at that time, but they go with her when she rides the horse. I'm Grandpa Book because I've always read books to our children. I think the Narnia stories I've read all the way through 5 times to them, and then when the grandchildren came along, I began that process as well of reading to them when we'd visit them and buying them books. And so they call me Grandpa Book. Even the little guy, who's now 6, when he was about 1 year and a quarter, he could say, "Grandpa Book, Grandpa Book." I knew who he was speaking to.
Yes. He was naming you and making a request at the same time.
That's it. Time for a story, Grandpa Book.
My eldest grandson, he couldn't understand the why he had two granddads.
Oh.
He couldn't. He had two granddads, and he couldn't make sense of that. So I became Papa Doug, and the other granddad was Papa Ray.
Oh, that's
so
good.
We're Papa Doug and Papa Ray.
That's good. The little guy that said Grandpa Book, his grandfather on his father's side is an engineer, and he's magical. He can do anything. So he's called Grandpa Fix-It, because they know that whenever anything goes wrong in their home, and Grandpa Fix-It comes from doorknobs to the electrical circuits have all broken down. He'll fix it, make it good. You know, mentioning grandchildren and children, I say all the important things in life I've learned from children. I really mean that. It's, I think, important to see the future through the eyes of the next generation. It gives you perspective. And the book, after the Idea of Canada book that you referred to, Erin, we did 2 books on innovation, and then we did a book called Trust, about the importance of trust in our relationships, and trust in our government, and trust in our communities. And the inscription at the beginning is to children who offer their trust implicitly in the full expectation of fairness. Just think of that. To children who offer their trust implicitly with the full expectation of fairness. And you know, that courage of the innocent to offer their trust is important, but it's also important that, you know, we respond to that by saying we must be fair, kind and fair, being kind of the fundamental values of being a Canadian.
I think that dedication also fits, as I'm sitting here considering it, David, to religion. We offer our trust in God, in an expectation or a hope of fairness, and also to government. So what can we do in this age of so much mistrust and so much misinformation? How do we get through this time that we're in right now, in your experience, and you have so much of it?
Well, I think we reinforce our leaders who, in fact, engender trust and seek our trust by speaking the truth to us. My Tea Party here in Canada is the 3 T's of truth, transparency, and trust. I mean, that's what we expect of our leaders. And I think we exercise our votes in the same way, that we should expect and vote for people who engender trust and build trust based on integrity, based on transparency and openness, and based on service, like the Queen, the leader's servant. So it seems to me that that's the basis of a functioning democracy. And if you look at this pandemic, you know, which has tested us so much, Erin and Doug, and has really created such havoc and chaos and death in our lives and fear, etc. The nations that have done best have been the ones that are most trustworthy. Fareed Zakaria on CNN was looking at deaths per capita, that terrible statistic of
Yes.
our systems just not working to protect us, and vaccination rates. And he had the United States on the screen. Its per capita death rate is about 3.5 times that of Canada's. And then even better than Canada is Denmark in terms of death per capita. U.S. about 3.5 times more than us, and about 4.5 times more than Denmark. And the other index he drew was the survey of trust in government. And in the case of the United States, it was down around the kind of 35th percentile, and Canada was up towards the 60th percentile. And in the case of Denmark, it was up in the 75th percentile. So there's a direct relationship between the trust we have in one another, the trust we have in our communities, in our regions, in our regional and provincial governments, and in our national governments, and how we respond to something like this pandemic that has such devastating consequences, especially for older people. Where there is trust, there's a tendency to be able to face up to the problems and deal with them. George Shultz, who was the quite remarkable statesperson in the United States, Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of State, Secretary of Labor, and Chief of Staff to both Republican and Democratic institutions. Just imagine that in today's world. Once said, trust is the coin of the realm. Where you have trust, whether it's the operational room, the family room, the military room, the training room, everything goes well. And when you don't, it doesn't. Everything else is detail. And trust is such a foundation of a functioning society and a functioning democracy. Heavens, we wouldn't get out of bed in the morning if we didn't have some trust that things would be working reasonably well.
It's so true. It is so true. And in these times when we have lost our connection with each other, we need to get that back, as well as the trust. And you and Ron Schlegel, who have been close for many years, you have talked about the beauty of human connectivity. Can we look at that a little bit? I mean, we're experiencing it right now, aren't we, Doug? Being able to talk with the Right Honourable David Johnston. Please don't find me for saying your title.
That's $20 now, Erin. The amount is going up.
Got me. And we're going to talk about where this money's going to in a moment as well.
It goes to the Rideau Hall Foundation. It'll produce another trust book. The book we're working on now is called Empathy, which is what Ron and I often talk about. Sympathy is I feel sorry for your situation. Empathy is I see your situation and I walk with you side by side and we do something about it. And that's what Ron engenders. And that's the Schlegel culture. I regard myself as a member of the Schlegel family, adopted, going back to when we arrived in Waterloo in 1999. And of course, they come from a Mennonite background. We lived in a farm about 12-minute drive from the university in Mennonite country, 100-acre farm, and all our neighbors were horse and buggy people, Mennonites, and they were absolutely wonderful. And that notion of kindness, of looking to the needs of the other person was so key. I tell a story about that, if I could just go into it. Edgar Shantz was the Mennonite neighbor who leased our farmland of 100 acres and became a close friend and kind of guide to us as innocent people on a farm and not knowing which end of the tractor to start with. And Sharon was running a 36-horse stable with training and so on that she inherited with the farm. And the insurance rates were fairly high. And so the insurance broker said, look, reappraise all of your buildings. You don't want to underinsure them, but you don't want to overinsure them, and just be sure they're accurate. So she was out with a clipboard one day looking at the buildings, and Edgar came along doing something in the field with his tractor, and he said, Sharon, can I help you? You're looking here in the barn. She says, well, what's this barn cost, Edgar? He says, well, what do you mean? He said, well, what would it cost us to replace it? He said, well, why would you want to replace it? Well, Edgar, if there was a fire, we'd have to replace it, and then it would cost a lot of money. And so I got to insure it for the right value. He said, Sharon, if there was a fire and your farm burned down, we'd replace it. We'd come to help to put out the fire. It's volunteer fire grade here. Once it's out, we'd wait till it cooled down, come that weekend, and we'd clear out all the debris. And the next weekend, then if it needed another weekend, we'd come and we'd rebuild it. We supply all the timber. We have forests, woodlands around our farms, and we have a sawmill. And we'd have the hinges and so on. Oh, but he says the roof, that's a tin roof. That would probably be burned up in the fire, so we'd have to buy the tin for that. So put $1,000 value on it, and that's how we'd rebuild your farm. That's the notion of barn raising, which is really a kind of signature of the Mennonite people. But it was the signature that I used for the whole of Waterloo. That's a community of barn raisers, and that's simply being conscious of your neighbor and people who aren't your neighbors, who are strangers, but need your help, and you provide that help.
That is so often the case, that people don't care about something until it happens to them.
Right.
And we see that over and over again, but it is truly that empathy and the compassion and the ability to walk in someone else's moccasins, if you will.
Yeah, it is. Another story I tell from my friend Edgar, from whom I learned so much, because, I was president of the University of Waterloo, and I'd wander around the country speaking about Canada's technology triangle and the great advances that were coming from that community. And then I'd realize that I come home each evening to people who make very careful choices about what technology is useful and what they don't need. Our Mennonite neighbors, they didn't need cars and trucks. They used tractors on their land, but they didn't need television in their homes. They could live without it. And one day I was on the tractor with Edgar, and he had a short-sleeved shirt on, and he had a bandage just over the area of his elbow, the inside of his elbow. And I said, Edgar, that's a strange place for a Band-Aid. That's normally where you have a needle of something or you give blood. And he says, yeah, I give blood. I said, what, you give blood? And I thinking of the Mennonites being very austere in their own communities and so on. And he says, yeah, I do. Our son at age 3 had a very serious operation at 6 Children's Hospital and needed a lot of blood, and I've been a regular blood donor all my life. I said, how many pints have you given, Edgar? He said, 207. I said, Edgar, you're 55 58 years old. That you only can give blood once every 3 or 4 months. So you could never do. Oh no, he says every 57 days. So every 57th day he would hitch up his horse and buggy and he'd drive it 12 kilometers to Elmira, the nearest village, and he'd give blood and come home, unless it was a Sunday, in which case he'd go on the 58th day. And one day he went to give blood, and they tested him. They said, Mr. Johnston, I'm sorry, we can't take your blood. You're anemic. See your doctor. Well, he didn't know what anemic meant, and Mennonites don't go to see doctors regularly, only extremists. And came back 57 days later, and again they took a test. Mr. Johnston, I'm sorry, you're anemic. We can't take your blood. So he thought, well, if I'm going to give blood, I better get this anemia, or whatever it is, rid of. And went to the doctor, and fortunately they discovered that there was symptoms of cancer, and he had about a foot of his colon removed, and they caught it early, and he was just fine. And so it's a wonderful story of someone, doing something for someone else. Blood goes to anyone, and here it has saved his life. And when I went off to college in Boston, I had begun the habit of giving blood as a 17-year-old in Sault Ste. Marie and wanted to continue it. And I looked on the campus for the blood donation clinic, and there wasn't one. I looked in the phone book and found it, and got on the subway, got off at the station, and it was the crummiest neighborhood you could imagine. But there was a Red Cross in a rather unusual warehouse-like building, and I went over, and inside, here are about 10 homeless men there, very decrepit, etc. And all of a sudden I realized that in the United States you're paid for giving blood, and these poor homeless fellows, this is, what they would do.
Yeah.
You're paid to give blood, and you're charged, of course, when you receive blood. And I thought, it's one of the singular features of Canada that we don't charge people to receive a donation of blood when they're sick, and we don't pay people to give it. And it's really important, I think, that Canada sees that and other manifestations of looking after the other whom we don't know. When we contribute a pint of blood, we don't know where it will go, but we know it will save someone's life.
That's a beautiful, beautiful
story. It is, isn't it?
Metaphor. All of it.
Great story of Canada.
Beautiful. David, what was it like growing up in a house with 6 young ladies? And did you play board games?
Did we play board games? We sure did. And I would claim that my wife would always cheat, and that's why she would win. And with the children, they'd always win because they were just so smart. But what I would say about the 6 women, Doug, is that I'm the most improved man in the world.
Yay.
And the reason for that is 6 women would get up every morning and say, how do we improve Dad today? And they would say, unfortunately, he slips back every night. But the good thing is that this would go on for the teenage years, where each of the daughters would feel their mission in life was to improve their father. And a little bit with their mother, but she didn't need very much improving. But around about age 19 or so, you'd be going up in a ski lift with your daughter, you'd be driving or someone, she'd say to her, Dad, I've got something to say to you. And you say, yes, dear, what is it? You've changed a lot, Oh, have I, dear? Yeah, he says, you're actually interesting to talk to now. You didn't used to be. And each time I've said, isn't it wonderful that an old man like me can change so much? So I've changed dramatically 5 times. And it's all to the credit of the daughters.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful.
Lovely story, David.
Now, we know you have to go. So before we let you go, sir, we need to find out where our fines and donations are going.
Oh,
of course.
my, yes.
Tongue in cheek.
Yeah, we're accumulating. That word, sir, costs at least $5 there, Erin, so keep on.
Well, I've got lots of words that'll cost money, but they're not. Never mind. Okay. All right.
We arrived in Rideau Hall in 2010, and fairly quickly, I think we became patrons of over 150 organizations across the country. And I thought, that's nice. You want to be patron to help charitable organizations, but it's just a name on the letterhead. We want to do more than that. And the Office of the Governor is very traditional. And so we've created a philanthropy and volunteer committee to provide advice, and went across the country and met with groups of people in the Order of Canada whose motto is they desire a better country. And these are people who worked really hard to do that, and sought their advice. And out of that came is if you want to engage more with the different charities and initiatives across the country that are helping to make this a smarter and more caring country where everyone has a sense of belonging, you have to do something more entrepreneurial than simply sit there and convoke ceremonies and send letters and so on. So we created the Rideau Hall Foundation to amplify the outreach of the Office of the Governor General to network and collaborate with other organizations to build a smarter, more caring country. And so we're celebrating our 10th anniversary now, and it's just been wonderfully successful. I could go on at length about the programs. The one we're working on now that really excites me is a partnership with MasterCard Foundation, which is a very substantial foundation, to fund 10,000 Indigenous young people to become teachers over the next decade, with identifying them early in the later grades of primary school, following through high school, providing financial help if necessary, and opportunities to be mentored and to see teaching situations, camp counseling in summers and so on, and then with a B.Ed degree in a university to become a teacher. And we expect that with that particular initiative, 10,000 new young Indigenous people as teachers and proud of the profession, proud of their culture, etc., we can eliminate the education gap between Indigenous and non-Indigenous young people. That's just one of the programs that we have. We created the Governor General's Innovation Awards to recognize and celebrate innovation across the country. We now have a prize for high school students with innovations, being technological or business or social innovations, working with Junior Chamber of Commerce chapters across the country. We manage the Queen Elizabeth Scholar Program, which sends Canadians abroad and brings international students here. That's now almost $100 million invested in over 3,000 students, on a bit of a hiatus now with the COVID, but that'll pick up again. I could go on and on about the different things that we do. One, to come back to your question about fake news and distrust in media, Erin, is when Roland Michener was Governor General, when he left office, he created the Michener Awards for Integrity in Journalism. And it was named after his daughter, Wendy, who died of, I think, of cancer at a young age, and it was to memorialize her. But it had become not very noticeable. So Rideau Hall Foundation now operates the Michener Awards to celebrate 6 finalists in print or television media each year for public integrity in journalism. And then one is selected. And the program they're working on now is to take those winning organizations and make them available to the schools of journalism across the country and universities and colleges to present face-to-face to young people that are interested in being writers, communicators, journalists, what integrity in journalism is about and what trust and truth in journalism is all about. So just one of the many things that we do with the Rideau Hall Foundation, always through networking with other organizations and providing kind of support and reinforcement for them to do great works in their communities. I should just mention one other, because it's kind of forgotten. The Office of the Governor General is responsible for the honor system in Canada through we call it the Chancery, where these awards are done. There are about 70 different honors that Canada has, best known one being the Order of Canada. But Romeo LeBlanc, who was a wonderful Governor General, created the Caring Canadian Award. He came from an Acadian village, and he was very conscious of how important volunteers were to a community. And I think during his time, there were 40 or 50 Canadians who were recognized as outstanding volunteers. And these are unsung heroes, people who aren't in the front pages of the newspaper, but just year after year, they run the Meals on Wheels program, or the food banks, or Red Cross, you coaching a baseball team or figure skating team, you name it. And it fell into desuetude. It just largely disappeared because of budget cuts in the office before we arrived. So one of the first things we did with the Rideau Hall Foundation was to raise $5 million so that the yield from that would ensure that we could offer at least 1,000 Caring Canadian Awards each year. And when we informed Queen Elizabeth about it, we proposed to her that they be called the Queen Elizabeth Medal for Volunteerism, and she said, "I'm just delighted, but let's call it the Sovereign's Medal of Volunteerism so it will continue on a sustainable basis." And I can't tell you how touched I would be, Sharon and I would be at these ceremonies where we'd be presenting the Sovereign's Medal in Volunteerism to these volunteers, and they would say, "Well, why me? There's so many other people who have done such important things. They should be recognized too." And I often say that if you want to judge the health of a particular community, city or a town, look at the volunteers per capita. If that number is well above average, that's a healthy community. If they're not, it isn't.
Oh, we couldn't end on a more caring note, and we thank you so much for your time and your passion and your compassion and for being a part of the Schlegel community, adopted, as you say. And we wish you and Sharon just many more happy years of marriage and parenthood and grandparenthood, and all the love and gratitude to you both for what you've given to Canada and what you've given to us today. We are in your debt. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
Take care. Keep well, both of you.
We sure will. Well, we are certainly richer for having sat down with the former Governor General today, although maybe lighter a loony or two, thanks to a very good cause. From as close as it gets to Canadian royalty to the neighbor in the room next door and the caring staff members who are there for them, you just never know who you're going to meet on the green bench. So be sure and subscribe and you won't miss an episode. They come out every 2 weeks. Just go to elderwisdom.ca to find the link. And while you're there, sign the Elder Wisdom Pledge too, won't you? Doug and I are so looking forward to our next chat here. A former Catholic priest who left to get married and has now found his way serving a congregation in the United Church. It's an honest and emotional discussion about life, even its ending, that will have you thinking about our chat with Jack long after the closing theme has played here. I promise. On behalf of Doug Robinson, I'm Erin Davis. We thank you for sharing in these life stories, and we'll talk to you again soon, because your seat on the green bench is ready and waiting.
Elder Wisdom, Stories from the Green Bench, is brought to you by Schlegel Villages, a complete continuum of care, offering independent living to long-term care, celebrating and honoring the wisdom of the elder. To learn more about us, please go to our website, schlegelvillages.com.